رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي واللهم ثبتنا عند الموت بلا إله إلا الله واللهم اجعلنا من الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر آمين يا رب العالمين. In today's khutbah, I'd like to share with you some reflections from two ayat that belong to Surah Al-Baqarah. But before I talk about those ayat, I'd like to share some basic definitions with you and some concepts that are not often talked about. I have spoken about these things before, but not in this way. And like many of the ulama of our past, and students of the Quran of the past, whenever they pass by ayat that they have studied before, Allah Azza wa Jalla even describes it Himself, لَمْ يَخِرُّوا عَلَيْهَا صُمًّا وَعُمْيَانًا. They don't trip over them, mute, deaf and blind. What that means is they don't ever say, oh, I already know this. Like, when you read some other book and you've already read it, you read this chapter already, you say, I could skip this part because I already know this part, I'll go to another part. But that is just not the attitude of a believer towards the Quran. They go back to the same ayat that they've read hundreds, if not thousands of times, and Allah opens wisdom upon them, and He opens up guidance and counsel upon them. And even the Sahaba would experience this anew. Like, there are instances in the life of the Prophet ﷺ where, the ayah was recited that was revealed a long time ago, but it was recited again, and Sahaba would say, I felt like it just came down. I felt like it was just revealed. So the idea of going back and reviewing and pondering again and engaging the book of Allah repeatedly and continuously is just one of the gifts that Allah has given this book. لا تنقضي عجائبه. Its wonders don't ever cease. And that's hopefully a relationship you and I will always have the rest of our lives, that will keep going back to the book of Allah, and we will never underestimate what it has to offer. You and I will never think to ourselves, I already know the Fatiha, I can read something else now. I already know Baqarah, I already know this ayah, I already know this surah, I already know what it means, I've already read the translation. This kind of underestimating you can do with any other book. You can't do it with the book of Allah. Because its wisdom is far beyond, even the wisdom of one ayah is far beyond what any one human being can fully internalize ever. In any case, what I wanted to share with you today was a basic distinction, a difference between two English terms first. And those two terms in English are a cult versus a community. A cult versus a community. And a cult, obviously, so those of you that are familiar with the term, is not a good word. It's an ancient word of the English language. Its origins from the 1600s, back in the day, it actually was used for worship itself. But in the modern usage of the word cult, it's used for a group of people that are cut off and they do their own weird ritual practices. You have devil worshipping cults, or you have heavy metal cults, or you have all these different kinds of groups, strange groups that are kind of on the fringes of society, and they form cults. But there are some things that I wanted to highlight that make a cult different from a community. Let's first talk about what they have in common. A cult is when a group of people come together, and a community is also when a group of people come together. So what makes them different? Here's the first of all differences. A cult sees itself as against the rest of the world. They want to see themselves as one thing, and everybody else is out to get them, and they are at war, if not physically, at least ideologically, with everyone else. So they are a closed group that is antagonistic and aggressive. As compared to that, a community is actually something that keeps its doors open all the time. A community actually wants to learn about other communities. Like Allah will say, لِتَعَارَفُوا, so you can get to know one another. It welcomes people from other communities, it opens doors, it makes cooperation happen, it does business with other communities, it has trade agreements and all kinds of things. So cults are closed and aggressive, and communities are open and welcoming. That's the first difference between the two. Another thing about a cult is that it wants uniformity. It wants everybody to be exactly the same. They should dress the same, they should look the same, they should talk the same, they should behave the same. And if you see even a little bit of variation, they'll catch you right away. You might get kicked out of the cult if you don't follow along. They are very, very specific about how you have to behave. Right? And in a community, you have, by opposite, in a community, you have diversity. You can have people that are dressed differently, that talk differently, that have different habits, and that's fine. It's okay to have people of different backgrounds and different ethnicities and different languages and different eating habits. All of it's fine. But a cult, there's no tolerance for these kinds of things. You have to stick to this thing. And if you don't, then you're in trouble. You're going to get kicked out. And then from here you get the next difference between these two. The best way to keep people inside a cult is to scare them and to make them feel guilty, or to instill anger in them towards others. Cults feed off of negative emotions. They need it. They need to make you angry to stay in the cult. So they'll constantly curse some other group or some other community, and they'll fire you up against them, and that's how they stay together. Their anger keeps them united. Or they will guilt you for not being good enough a member of the cult. And they'll constantly shame you and guilt you, and that's how you can stay inside. On the flip side of it is a community, which actually, when people make a mistake, they don't shame them and guilt them, they help pick them up. And they say, well, you know, if I had fallen and I had made a mistake, my brother would be there for me. These families would be there for me. So they're there to support each other, not guilt each other. And a community thrives off of encouragement instead of building anger and hatred. Instead of building suspicion towards others, a community is supposed to build, good relations, better understanding, giving each other benefit of the doubt, building trust among each other. These are the kinds of things that communities build. Then, of course, inside of a cult, there is absolutely no room for asking questions. You can't say, why do we do this way? How come we do that? Even, some cults are religious, so you can't even ask, how come we pray this way? Or how come we believe this? You can't ask questions, because if you ask questions, you're basically going to get kicked out. You might lose your membership for asking. You just shut up and follow. That's what you got to do if you want to stay in the cult. On the other hand, you have a community where questions are welcome. If you don't understand something, ask. And you're not going to get in trouble for asking. We can have an open conversation. We can share ideas. There's room for suggestion. There's room for questioning and better understanding. And people are going to be at different levels. Nobody's going to be made to feel guilty because they don't know something or they don't understand something. That's the point of a community. And of course, then the last part that I wanted to share with you as a difference between cults and communities is that cults, they have habits. They form certain practices and they do them and they don't even know why they do them. Over time, they don't even know why they're doing it. But everybody's got to do it. Everybody's got to do it. And if you come along and say, maybe this is not the best practice. Maybe there's a better way of doing things. Have we even ever asked the question, why we do this stuff? Why are we following it like this? Because it's harming our next generation. It's harming our families. It's harming this or that or the other. When you raise these questions, you can get, not only kicked out, you can become the enemy. You can be labeled and become the enemy. On the other hand, in a community, there's constantly open shura. There's constantly open suggestions. And if there are certain practices that used to be working 10 years ago, somebody comes along and says, this was pretty good 10 years ago, but I think we need a change. We need an update. So society has changed, times have changed, our needs have changed, and we need to adapt. And so a community is willing to do that. A cult is not willing to do that. A cult says, this is how we did things before, that's how we're going to do them now. Now you shut up, unless you want to get kicked out. Now I wanted to make this distinction between these two because a lot of times in churches, in synagogues, in temples, and even in masajid, in Muslim communities, we like to think of ourselves as a community, but more often than not, we turn these places into cults. And if not one cult, there are several cults within a community. One group getting together, aggressive towards everybody else. They're the ones that are right, everybody else is wrong. There are, in the history of Islam, for example, there's a diversity of fiqh. There's a diversity in the schools of thought. And you might belong to a particular school. If you come from some part of the world where there's a tradition and there's a heritage, the Malaysians have a several century heritage of the Shafi'i school of thought, for example. People from India, Pakistan, a good number of them, a huge majority of them are from the Hanafi school of thought, etc. So you come from a particular school of thought, but then you come with this idea that your school of thought is it, that's it. Anybody else who does anything else, I don't even know if they're actually real Muslims or not. This kind of thinking is cult thinking. This is not community thinking. This is not community thinking. So that's the first thing that I wanted to highlight. That cults, by the way, the only way they survive, I told you, is negative. That's the only way they can survive. And when they see a community growing and diversity growing, they feel threatened because they want everybody to be like them. They want everybody to be in uniform, exactly the same. So when they see that changing, they go on the attack. Cults will go on the attack. Now, this is within the religious framework, but there aren't just religious cults. I started with the example of masajid, but that's not the only place. Social circles form cults. You have people that aren't even religious. There are families that come from a particular background. They have a certain socioeconomic class. When they have a party, all those same families are invited. Now at this place's house, not that one, when the iftar season is going to start soon. Now, you're going to see the same faces over and over again, and that's a nice thing. These are all good things. But you know what happens sometimes within those circles? Certain values are imposed. So if all of them have a house and one of them has an apartment, then the one who has an apartment feels pressure. I feel left out of this circle unless I get into a mortgage. Because I don't belong. I can't even invite them for iftar. Because they'll look at, and just the way they look, they'll look at the apartment and say, oh, okay, just 2 bedrooms? Just that much. It'll eat me alive inside. That's a cult. Because you're putting pressure on this person to get into an economic transaction they can't afford. And they're feeling pressure even if nothing has been said to them. And they have to conform to a standard that doesn't even make sense for them. Every family has their own situation. Every family has their own background, their own problems. But you know what we do a lot of times? A lot of the pressure you put on yourself, and a lot of the pressure your family puts on you, and you put on your family, doesn't even have to do with you. It has to do with this cult pressure that's on you, and you don't want to lose membership from that cult. And as a result, you harm yourself, you harm your family. You harm, all it produces is harm. It does nothing good. These kinds of cults are formed inside offices. You are the only Muslim in the office. Everybody goes and has, goes to the happy hour or something. And they invite you every time, and you feel the pressure. And if you're not going to go, you're not going to be discussed when the promotion comes. You have to play this game, and you have to join them in their rituals if you want to be part of this thing. And there's kind of a unspoken membership. And if you don't play along, you're not considered a member. You're not going to be considered an equal. And you have to get your hands dirty and lose some of your principles. This is what a cult is, not just in the setting of a masjid, in the setting of a family, but even in the setting of an office, in colleges, in neighborhoods. You could see cult followings in neighborhoods where, when Christmas season, one family will go out of their way and put Christmas lights. And the other family will say, oh yeah? Now we can't afford it, but I think I can take a loan and put better Christmas lights than them. And nobody knows why they're doing it. They have no idea. Their primary reason is, my neighbor did it, I have to defeat them. That's their primary reason. If you're in a neighborhood of Muslims and somebody did an iftar, somebody did a party, and you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to give a better party. And you're feeling competition. This is cult mentality that eats away at a community. It creates competition, antagonism. That's what it builds. And so what I wanted to get at, especially when it comes to our families and big decisions we have to make for our families like marriage. A lot of times the reasons for choosing a partner, the reasons for building family ties, the reasons come from cults. They don't come from reason. They don't come from the idea of a community. This ummah, the basis for which this ummah was formed was taqwa. The basis for which you people are sitting together and I'm standing in front of you, the only basis for it is La ilaha illallah. That is it. That is it. The one figure that defines not our cult, but our culture and our community is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who had an incredible task in front of him. I mean, you have to understand, we're not traditional people anymore. We live in modern times. Even if you're the most traditional, a lot of things you do are not traditional. But the Arabs of that time were extremely, extremely traditional people. Forget thinking about foreigners as different. They thought of the next tribe as aliens. They were so hung up within their own identities, and to take those people and to build ukhuwa between them, brotherhood between them, is an incredible thing. Aus and Khazraj in Medina, they themselves didn't get along. They themselves had fights, and they're Medina. Imagine them versus Makkah, the people of Makkah. This was not something easy to overcome. But this kind of mentality has been there and will be there. And one of the functions of our deen, one of the purposes of our deen is to destroy this kind of thinking. Now I want to share the ayat with you.